Warning, this game contains rapidly flashing lights that may not be suitable for people with photosensitive epilepsy or light sensitivity. Viewer discretion is advised. I can explain. And to do so, we're going to go way back before the mayhem to take a look at this game, Picayune Dreams. My name is Joel Gaming, let's get into it. Picayune Dreams is a futuristic, bullet hell roguelike game set in space that feels very reminiscent of other fast-paced action games, including Vampire Survivors and others in the genre. As we begin to look at gameplay, the life-or-death situations of surviving hordes of colorful space aberrations aren't readily apparent. We instead gradually build up our arsenal, fighting small dorks that barely pose a challenge before the game slowly ramps up, providing more, stronger, faster monsters. Upon successfully unaliving some of the creatures barreling our way, they drop Matrix-esque experience points that, when collected, allow us to level up our gear and create unique, synergistic builds that quickly get out of hand. One of my favorites is collecting a small horde of parasites whose ability to swarm and devour the enemy felt nostalgic of my youth, where me and my fellow gametes swam determined toward the same goal. But, I digress. Other builds that I encountered that were a ton of fun included planet-sized ninja stars and bouncy balls that tore through enemies, giant saw blades and rockets, leaving craters where there used to be foes, and a colossal radial of spikes and demon teeth that kept the aberration spawnlings at bay. Let me tell you something about weapon size. Much like the other upgrades that reduce weapon cooldown and increase weapon speed, there is no upper cap, even though the UI on the right might suggest otherwise. This means that your weapons can grow as large as the screen and hit enemies before they even register as ocular stimuli for your primitive sapient eye and your mechanically enhanced peeper. All this to say, the gameplay is a lot of fun. Before long, however, we receive an incoming transmission from the first of the game's bosses, a rabbit-like villain who teases us for our seriousness and makes silly jokes before throwing the kitchen sink at us in the first of this game's bullet hell scenarios. The boss fights in this game are intense. Whether they be with this evil rabbit-like entity or the others, each fight had me clutching my pearls and locking in to dodge all the orbs of condensed nuclear energy thrown my way. Beyond just being on the edge of my seat while playing these, I really like these boss fights. Each boss had their own unique personality, whether that be silly, serious, intense, self-disparaging, or other. I found myself weirdly becoming attached and starting to like the bosses. I think that for a game to really stick with the player, you need to create a story with characters on both sides of good and evil, sometimes even gray areas between the two, that are likable and iconic, which I believe this game does a great job of doing. Once we defeat a boss, they explode, and pretty violently I might add, and we get the choice of continuing to a different area, with each containing a different planet and thus different enemies that bring unique challenges. Some are incredibly fast, while others can teleport, and some are just silly little guys. Now, with this game being a roguelike, it is expected that we're going to die, which we inevitably do. A lot. Upon doing so, we get a cool breakdown of our stats and a very futuristic AI system diagnostic before being brought back to the main menu. From here, we begin to unlock new weapons depending on how our last run went, and we can put points into our skill tree, which is generally divided into upgrades that give us more health, more black holes to suck up enemies with, more damage through crits, and rerolls to make sure we get our build just right. Personally, I found that the health upgrades made the game feel pretty easy, even on New Game Plus runs referred to as overdrive levels that make the game's damage, speed, and health scale, also your XP modifier. So if you're looking for a pretty chill run, as chill as things can be with living pie aliens reaching maximum velocity toward your face, this could be the way to go. In addition to health upgrades, I found myself putting points in the crit build part of the tree, which allowed me to occasionally one-shot enemies and set off a cascading effect that both cleared up my screen and also tanked my FPS, with enemies that have barely rendered being blown up and their XP beginning to accumulate and make my GPU cry for mercy. Now, I don't think I'd be doing this gameplay section justice without showing you what the pinnacle of Picayune Dreams gameplay looks like. Observe. As you can see, I not only have single-digit frames, but time in the game is slowed down tremendously. With game speed being tied to frame rate, not only can I not collect the copious amounts of XP off-screen that is actually causing my game to lag, I have now gained Neo-like abilities from the Matrix in exchange for shaving off minutes from the duration of my total lifespan. Not to fear, for a quick magnet pickup gathers all the XP lying around the map and remedies this problem, allowing us to now just be blinded by our upgrades instead of our poor frame rate. Freeing our computer from its torture, we can go to challenge the final boss, a horrific space entity who has not one, nor two, but 3 phases that we must conquer to beat the game. I found this section to be the epitome of bullet hell, with orbs of pure energy whizzing past our spacesuit, and most attacks requiring a blend of dexterity on the keyboard and fast movement speed through upgrades in the game. Not only does this boss have a giant health bar in each of her 3 phases, one of her attacks is undodgeable, requiring that you have a black hole to avoid being hit. Despite not blinking for 10 consecutive minutes and my eyeballs being ready to jettison out of their sockets, I was able to defeat the final boss, Picayune. Afterwards, we were given the choice of returning to Earth or continuing the madness as we, quote, yearn for infinity by fighting through monsters and past boss battles until our eventual demise. At this point, you're probably wondering, what just happened? I know I was after beating the game, for as cool as the game is, there seemed to be a lot of missing pieces. Who were the bosses that we killed? What is the backstory behind our main character? What happened to Picayune? What was her dream? Fortunately, as we begin to take a look at the game's story, we are given a glimpse into what led us to fighting aberrations in space and why the mission is so important to our main character. Let me explain. After completing each boss fight, the silly mascot will drop a flash drive where we learn that their backstory is quite the opposite. It is dreadful. The story begins with Izu Kamiya, our main character, who awakens in her spaceship dormitory before wandering through a hallway of distorted doorways that oscillate and glitch out in a terrifying way. She says that she doesn't remember what lies beyond these doors. With that said, we're able to enter the last doorway on the right, which brings us to Carrot World? In stark contrast to the previous area, we find ourselves in a dreamscape filled with giant carrots and rabbits who are, quote, not very smart but seem to be very happy. Before long, we stumble across a mailbox that lets us know when to gather our things so that training may begin. We are in the top 0.01% of candidates and that we have been selected for the program. The message also lets us know that humanity thanks us, and we are teleported to a much darker landscape, one filled with blood and mismatched architecture as we wander around. While doing so, we encounter red, fleshy creatures with hollow eyes who give us backhanded compliments and empty gestures that welcome us giving our lives in space so they don't have to. Following this, we talk with a few more NPCs who are presumably people in Izu's personal life before stumbling upon 3 tall, shadowy figures with deep sunken eyes and no other facial features, who warn that by signing this piece of paper we are, quote, donating our physical and mental being to the government in the name of protecting humanity. After signing our lives away, we find ourselves in a room where we can only move left and right, perhaps symbolizing that there is no going back. This hypothesis is given confirmation as the exit on our left, where we might otherwise go out to change our mind, is always just barely out of reach, while going forward is filled with binding documents, painkillers, and hopelessness as our screen fills with static. Not long after, we are planted in a small, sterile room with only a space helmet adorning the table across from us. After picking it up, the game reads that we have acquired the MK005 space helmet before we are brought back to the main menu. Wow, okay, that was a lot to take in. It seems that this game runs deeper than previously thought. The game's disturbing imagery continues into the other space crew members' backstories, and we learn just how dire and fruitless their mission really was, despite their intense training and the government's empty promises of them being prepared. Let's take Matt, for instance. After being reprimanded by the government for poor performance, he became forcibly biochemically modified to better serve their mission. While he was able to make his way to the medical bay as normal, the trip back is much more horrific. The game flashes these upsetting images of stretched out black and white faces with tears running down some of them, while others have their jaws agape. Random images and sprites from the game begin flashing on screen before Matt wakes up back in his bedroom at the research facility. The room is now turned sideways and the walls and floor are different colors than we remember. Upon interacting with objects or people, the game spits out technical jargon that highlights how Matt's ability to process what is going on around him has changed, as indicated by the slightly different sprite that includes his cybernetic modifications. Seeing our friends in the mess hall provides similar little comfort, as we cannot talk with them like we used to, and the people in the background rapidly change between different images from the game's files, with some being stretched and distorted beyond comprehension. The only solace we can find in this new hellscape is through Izu, who tells us, quote, be safe, Matt. As we enter a previously locked door, a bloody, mangled face watches us from the corner of our screen before we put on our space helmet. This trend continues with the remaining characters, with Harley, who used to be the team's leader before relinquishing the role to Picayune, now cannot even leave the compound to grab an energy drink without having feelings of guilt following her, and imagining her comrades falling one by one in front of her as they graphically explode into a bloody mess. Throughout her story, she cannot escape the feeling that she has let down her team and that she won't be able to save them, a thought that haunts her as she puts on her helmet. Alexis suffers a similarly poor fate, with her feelings being put on hold after having confessed to Harley, where the latter shares that she cannot possibly open up her heart during such a time of hardship and worry for their futures. When being asked by Harley if she understood, Alexis finds herself teleported to a vast oasis where she's encased in stone, watching as her teammates move on without her. She doubts the purpose of their mission and criticizes herself for feeling this way, given her teammates' struggles. We then see Alexis break out of her stone prison, retrieve her helmet, and join her teammates on the walkway that presumably takes them to their spaceship as they launch into orbit, determined to fight a hopeless battle against the aberration, a mysterious and powerful energy source in space that poses a risk to humanity. While normally our character's story may end there after they put on their helmet, we are allowed to continue playing as Alexis, who wakes up in her cabin on the spaceship. We leave our bedroom and begin to learn how desperate our situation is from our friends, who lament their fate, endorse feelings that something isn't right, and come to terms with the fact that they likely won't survive the encounter they've spent all these months training for. We also get the opportunity to talk to Picayune for the first time, who mans the ship and expresses her anger toward the government holding back information and likely knowing that she and her friends would be sent to their death. She begins begging for her life and expressing her rage by saying, quote, "How come we have to die for everyone else?" before she asks Alexis for help, and the screen fades to red while an image of the distorted Picayune that we're used to flashes on screen for a brief moment. From here, we are brought back to a familiar red purgatory from earlier, where we are helpless to run from Picayune, as she infects each of our crewmates one by one with the power of the aberration, turning them into the bosses that we inevitably encounter when playing Izu. While this happens, different flashing sprites appear on screen, and Picayune becomes progressively faster, and she catches us and her distorted face briefly flashes on screen. After infecting each crewmate, Picayune scurries off, and we are left with the marred corpse of Izu, whose spacesuit flickers green as the screen begins to fade to black, indicating that her mission is not yet over. Or not. I'm actually not sure if this last crew member is Izu, as this is where Picayune was standing just a moment ago, but seeing as she was not included in being infected by the others, we can only assume she evaded capture from her friend turned space demon. Now, with all the backstory covered, we can now focus on how our story ends. Warning, spoilers up ahead. Okay, let's get into it. As mentioned earlier, after beating Picayune, we can choose one of two options, to return to Earth or continue fighting in the infinite void. The latter is pretty self-explanatory, so let's take a look at what happens when we complete our mission. Upon returning to Earth, Izu is welcomed with, quote, open arms following the completion of her mission, where Earth's inhabitants greet her warmly, and she expresses with certainty how she knew she made the right choice in seeing the mission through. Afterwards, the government gives her a full physical and psychiatric evaluation and confirms she is the only survivor, expressing melancholy toward the idea that she doesn't recognize herself nor her friends and family. Seemingly, Izu has absorbed Picayune, indicated by calling herself a, quote, sleeper freak of nature abnormality. She sits at the dinner table with people whose faces are unfamiliar to her, sharing stories that, as part Picayune, she cannot remember doing when she was fully still. Furthermore, she expresses how the world moves on, yet neglects the upcoming disasters that they are creating through pollution, war, and global warming. Despite this, she resigns to her fate, claiming that, quote, I've done all I can only give humanity what it wants, not what it needs, before we return to the main menu. Now, as cheery as that ending sounded, don't give up hope, for there is another. To get the true ending of the game, you must complete a playthrough without getting hit. Yep, you heard that right. Do not get hit one single time while dodging literal armies of living Dorito creatures and floating skulls. Fortunately, using the black hole strategically and memorizing boss attack patterns, it is not as difficult as I thought. After beating Picayune this time, Izu picks up her fallen crew member and persuades Picayune to use her powers for good. Picayune exclaims how she's scared of what everyone will think, but decides to trust Izu, also referred to as Syl, and unleashes all of the latent energy dormant in the aberration to release quite a few colorful creatures she had stockpiled, as well as reviving their old crewmates. We then find ourselves on the beach with everyone enjoying being back to their old selves, and Picayune thanks us, stating that she knows that, quote, this was the right call and that she's the happiest she has ever been. Aww. And as we transition to the remaining parts of this game that deserve coverage, we get to hear this lovely music that plays following the true ending, where Syl gets to save all of her friends. That makes me happy. Also, please let me know down in the comments if there's any parts of the story that I got twisted, as the merging kind of thing going on with Syl and Picayune had me a little confused, but I'm just glad to be along for the ride. Back to the aforementioned point, the music in this game is phenomenal. Whether it be mid-battle, during our descent into the void, or after certain endings in the game, the music provides an atmosphere that feels both immersive and accurately captures the trippy sci-fi aesthetic of the game. Similarly, the graphics are uniquely their own and look amazing, allowing the world of Picayune Dreams to come to life in both vibrant and horrific ways depending on the mood of the scenes shown in the game. Beyond graphics, the last part of the game that I thought deserves mention includes the statues that you can unlock in the skill tree. Normally these statues provide the player with buffs, such as increased max items in exchange for harder enemies, or a bubble shield that provides invincibility granted by a friendly turtle with a city on its back.
Michael! Don't leave me here! Michael! Michael!
What's even more interesting is that one of the statues allow you to fight a mini-boss hidden within the game. It can be located by using a chain bomb on the gambler statue, which spawns Yuki, a woman wearing what appears to be a blue kimono who chases after you and shoots icicles in her first phase. Her attack of choice is fitting, given that her name in Japanese means snow or happiness. However, once her health bar is low enough, we get the direct opposite of happiness as her snow turns to fire, and she barrels toward us in a furious rage. Despite her intensity, the boss itself isn't that challenging, and we get a free level up after beating her. In the same vein, we can access the other secret boss by making use of the environment in space. By having the quote, undying horrific force, swallow a health kit, it transforms into this gangly, writhing creature that waits patiently while we kill the remaining enemies on screen. Upon closer inspection, it looks like that this being is wearing the same suit that we are, hinting at the idea that this person is someone who is sent into space before us to challenge the aberration. This monster confirms this idea when speaking to Syl, where she says, quote, I'm not the first, in response to the monster's silence. Now, compared to the last boss fight, this one is kind of redonkulous. Not only does this boss fire red and black orbs filled with pure malice, its attack patterns are irregular and fires shadowy echoes of itself that add to the chaos on screen that we are required to dodge. Coupled with the fact that it blinks across our screen, I challenge this boss at an early level, and then it makes the low battery sound for smoke detectors. This boss was quite a challenge. Fortunately, after some trial and error, we were able to beat the ghost who utters his first word. Wow, okay, first of all, anyway, that concludes my playthrough of Picayune Dreams. Really enjoyed this game and went into it with no expectations and was overjoyed with the experience I had. I recommend supporting the developers on Steam by buying their game and helping them make more cool content like this. Similarly, if you thought this video was some cool content, please consider liking and subscribing. Also, if you had a favorite part of this video, had an enjoyable moment in your own playthrough, or wanted to help clarify some parts of the story, let us know in the comments down below. Alright, well, that's all for now. I gotta go suit up and catch my rocket flight to go fight hordes of evil pie creatures and save humanity. Thanks for watching. This is Droll Gaming, signing off.